Hi, this is Stephen from Own or Disown. Hidevolution sent me the Alienware M15 R3 to review. Now, I have owned several Alienware laptops myself over the years, and I was excited to test the third edition of the M15, as I had reportedly improved the cooling over versions 1 and 2, adopting a vapor chamber between the CPU and the copper heat pipes, and the R3 also uses 40% more copper and 25% more fan blades compared to the R2, resulting in about 10% more air intakes. Consequently, it is about 100 grams heavier than the previous model. Weighing in at £5, it is lighter than the MSI GE66, but it does have a large 240 watt power brick, which does add another £2 to its carry weight. Now, my unit has the 6-core i7-10758 CPU, but should you wish an 8-core CPU, you can either have the i7-10875H or the unlocked i9-10980HK. One advantage of buying a laptop from Hidevolution is that they can repaste it. Since the motherboard is inverted on the M15 R3, I really do advise this. If you're worried about using liquid metal, they can apply a regular good paste like Gelid GC Extreme, as I have on my test unit. Now, for graphics, you can choose from a GTX 1660 Ti, an RTX 2060, an RTX 2070, or a 2070 Super like I have, both of which are 115 watt Max P, and an RTX 2080 Super Max Q. Also, if you do prefer an AMD GPU, you can have the RX5500m. Now, the RAM is soldered on, so I do recommend you choose what you want based on your future needs. As an enthusiast, I am not a great fan of this. It is unlikely that the RAM will fail, but it's always nice to have the option to change it if need be. My unit has 16GB of DDR4 2666 MHz in dual channel, so it is a little bit slower than the 2933 MHz we see on competing systems, and can be configured up to a max of 32GB. Now, you do have plenty of storage options with the 3 M.2 slots. 2 of them are occupied in RAID 0, and mine had a read speed of 3335 megabytes per second, and mine has a total of 512 gigabytes. Now, the third slot is the shorter 2230 format, so keep that in mind when you're adding more storage. The rear magnesium alloy cover is held in place with Phillips head screws, and it is easily removed. You will notice that it has good air intakes, but since the heat pipes are on the other side of the motherboard, cool air is also brought in via a grill above the keyboard. As you can see from this thermal image, cool air is also brought in through the keyboard. Now, the centre of which does get a little bit warm, but the palm rest area and the WASD keys are nice and cool. You can also see a good amount of hot air being pushed out of the chassis. You have speaker grills that fire down as well as facing you, and indeed the speakers are really quite good. There's a good amount of bass, and they get pretty loud as well, certainly better than average. Now, unfortunately, if you do need it for real-time audio, it did fail my latency test. There is a sizable 86 Wh battery, but runtimes are poor due to the lack of Optimus on my 300Hz panel. At 30% brightness, I got an hour 23 minutes streaming YouTube, which increased to an hour 35 minutes at 25% brightness. Now, there's no G-Sync on my 300Hz panel, but you can use FastSync if you wish. Now, the AUO panel has 94% of sRGB, but it's not that bright at 258 nits. Now, it is definitely a good gaming panel though, and showed minimal ghosting, but it did have quite a bit of backlight bleed at the lower corners, which are only visible when viewing a black scene. You do have other screen options, which include a 4K OLED 60Hz, which is ideal for content creation, and a 144Hz 1080p, which does have G-Sync when paired with an NVIDIA GPU. It is also available with the AMD RX5500m, and I suspect that one will have Optimus. So if you do want longer run times, I recommend getting that one or the 4K panel, and expect 5 to 6 hours of juice. Now, there is no mux switch on any of the models, which I do personally find a shame. Competing models like the Legion 7i and the GE66 do have such an option. For Wi-Fi, they use the killer AX1650 Wi-Fi card, which is a rebranded Intel AX200 Wi-Fi 6. Now, it does work well, but unfortunately it is soldered on as well. Now, Tobii eye tracking is an optional feature on some models, but it wasn't available on my unit. I have used it in the past, and to be honest, I found it to be a bit of a gimmick. I have also heard that it can conflict with the mouse cursor, causing it to move by itself. So we do have a 720p webcam that's located at the top where it should be. And actually, I think it's okay. The microphone's pretty good. this is what it's like when you type. There's no denying that the Alienware M15R3 is a very nice looking laptop. You can either have the white model, like mine, or a black one. It does have an improved surface coating which does stop fingerprints on the magnesium alloy chassis. The one-piece touchpad is made of glass and uses precision drivers, and I did like the deep, definitive click actuation. The keys are nice and large with 1.7mm of travel, so they do feel very good to use. You have N key rollover and a 4-zone RGB lighting which is customizable via their software. You can also highlight certain keys like I have here with the WASD keys. Now the only thing missing, in my opinion, are dedicated buttons to switch to power modes, activate max fan, or to open the Alienware command center. At least the Alien Head power button is separate, but it doesn't double as a fingerprint reader. This and the Alien Head on the back of the lid can also have their colour changed, which is a nice touch. You will notice a 15 lit up on the lid, which is a nice design touch, and for those that like RGB, there's a customizable light ring around the rear exhaust. On the left, there's their Noble Lock, Gigabit Ethernet, USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A with power share and a combo headphone mic jack. And on the right is a UHS 2 micro SD card reader. Now it is a shame that it's not a full SD card slot, and you have two more USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A ports. Around the back there is an HDMI 2.0B, a mini DisplayPort 1.4, a Thunderbolt 3 port and the amplifier port, plus the power port. Now the fans do a good job of moving air, but as a result they do get rather loud. At idle they are certainly not silent and are about 2 decibels higher than most other laptops. And with the max fans they are definitely pretty loud. So using the Alienware command center you can actually create your own fan and power profile to try and reduce this to your liking. Now there is no question that Dell pushes the CPU hard in performance mode. During its Cinebench R20 test it pulls 82 watts and holds around about 82 degrees Celsius, and scoring 3154 points, which beats the same CPU in the Helios 300 and even the Ryzen 5 4600H. Even in the long-running bare handbrake encode, it beats the i7 10750H in the HP Pavilion 16 by some 20%, and in Blender it again beats the Ryzen 4600H, which is a very good performance. But despite the better fans, the larger heat pipes and also the vapor chamber cooling, the Alienware M15R3 still does run hot when gaming, unless you do some tweaking. Now I did use throttle stop to undervolt to minus 70 millivolts. Now it doesn't show up in HW info as an offset voltage, but it does work. And using Far Cry New Dawn to showcase the thermals, this is what I get. At the top is the thermal top speed mode with max fans. The CPU is pulling about 55 watts and still hits 100 degrees. In the middle is balance mode, also with max fans, and the CPU is still hitting 100 degrees. At the bottom we have quiet mode, and this will drop the CPU to 25 watts, causing the CPU clock rate to drop, and the 2070 Super also drops from 115 watts to about 105 watts. The temperatures do drop of course, but also so does the frame rate. Now using my custom fan curve, balance mode and the 70 mV univolt, the CPU is holding a great boost clock at 45 watts and the GPU is still pulling 115 watts. And the CPU temperature is 10 to 15 degrees less. As for fan noise, I did reduce it from 57 decibels to 55 decibels, which, in my view is pretty good, but with a bit of tweaking, you may be able to reduce this further. Using the inbuilt benchmark, I didn't feel the performance was quite where it should be and was quite some way behind the GE66 with the same 2070 Super GPU. Here is Battlefield 5, DX11 Ultra settings, and at the top the CPU is at 65 watts and it does struggle to cope, but once it drops to 45 watts then the system copes quite well with the temperature. I would be inclined to use XTU to set the PL1 value to 45 watts, and this is, to be honest, something Alienware should have done with their balance mode. Compared to the 2080 Super Max Q in the GE66, it again was some way behind. I would say it performs similar to the 2070 Super in the Mech 15 G3. So how would I sum up the Alienware M15R3? Well, there's no denying that it is a great looking laptop. I particularly like the white model and its design with the tasteful RGB lighting. It is quite refreshing. I really like the speakers as well. The keyboard, trackpad were a pleasure to use, and you do have ample ports. But for the life of me, I just don't know why there's no full-size SD card reader. Alienware do offer a number of different SKUs starting at around about $1,400, so there are options to suit most people. But since they sold on the RAM, make sure you consider what your future usage will be when you do configure it. Now, if I was buying this laptop, I would get Hidevolution to repaste it with liquid metal, as they do a great job and it is warranted. And this may help you reduce the fan noise a little bit further as well. Gaming performance may be a little bit behind the GE66, but it's still pretty decent. Perhaps the lowered powered 2080 Supermax Q option would help with thermals and offer about a 5% more performance. I was very impressed with the CPU performance. Great for anyone wanting a fast 6-core CPU. Beating the Ryzen 5 4600H is no mean feat. Thank you for watching. Remember, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.